Hello, and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Hello, Father.
Good to be with you again, Colleen, as always.
Yes, it's so good to be here again with you, Father. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the story of Kermit Gosnell, the abortionist from Philadelphia, whose story has been the topic of a book, a movie, and now a podcast. So we're going to jump into that because, Father, your article last week was on Gosnell. So what motivated you to write about him?
Well, I think, since the overturning of Roe and Casey, that obviously the whole abortion narrative is out there, from both sides of the aisle. So those advocating for, those of us who have been working for pro-life movement and pro-life cause and defending human life, that it's good for us to remember that the Gosnell story is one that speaks for itself as a story, but that is repeated, in the fact that we still have abortion in many of the states. We have abortionists performing abortions in these states, and that there are many people around our country who don't even know anything about Gosnell, much less about the people in their own neighborhoods, which is what happened here too. People driving by, walking by, never knowing what's happening inside those doors. And I think that the story itself of Gosnell brings that story back to the forefront, keeps it up in people's minds and hearts, even though the social media doesn't pick it up in modern day media. But the podcast, series puts it back out there. And I think that also I'm hoping what it'll do is it'll put in the mindset of other people in states where abortion is still legal. Is this happening in my neighborhood? Is there an abortion facility nearby my home? If so, what am I doing about it? Am I making people aware of it? So that was the whole intention behind my reason to bring the story, into a Spirit and Life column.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like you just mentioned, there is a new true crime podcast about it for any of our listeners who want to go a little further into this topic or who are interested. Produced by Anne McElhaney and her husband, Phelim McAleer. I think I said that properly. And she also wrote a book, and there's a movie about it. So there's a lot of information on this topic, and so we'll discuss a little bit of the story today, but for anybody who wants to go deeper into that, I'll link at least the podcast, and if I can find links to the others, put those.
And Colleen, what I would add is that I know that I've written on Gosnell many times. I know Dr. Brian Close, has written many articles, or we've made reference to Gosnell many times. So even on HLI's own resources, if people kind of come to our website and kind of put the name in there in a search engine, it should bring up some other stories and some other history and other writings that have happened by HLI authors. So it's, but like I said, it's just we're making reference, but those wonderful podcasts and the movie itself will put a lot more detail and a lot more content of what he was actually doing. So it's great that people have many resources to go to learn about this man.
Well, and that's one of the points that we had, was that this is a case that has been very well researched. So unlike the undercoverness that happens with a lot of abortion facilities, this is one that's very much out there in the open. It's been, like you said, we have articles about it. There's been journalists that have covered it. And even back when it was a case back in, forget the year, I want to say 2011 or sometime around then, it was actually covered by mass media because back then you couldn't really avoid it.
Exactly.
So they don't talk about it anymore. But
Right.
So anyway, let's just jump right in a little bit of the story of Gosnell. Who was he? What's the vague storyline?
Sure. So just kind of trying to put it into a little nutshell. So we're back now to 1972. It's kind of back up in time. So Dr. Kermit Gosnell, so MD, has been really active in the abortion conversation for decades. And so when abortion became legal, this is something that he was engaged in. But as you will find, as our readers and listeners, to the podcast series will find, is, Gosnell was really followed by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. I'm going to make sure I got my little letters in there, what it means, because there were allegations at the time about him distributing opioids and other drugs, not only performing abortions and performing procedures. And so his name was well, in a sense, known, within the local police, among the local agencies, in the community. So we had stories of him where women who had gone in, for an abortion, were maimed, were harmed. A lot of times this was, as we know with the abortion industry, involves a lot of minority women in poor situations in their communities. And so these stories were circulating all over. And so this is what was happening in that moment. So what brought him to the forefront really was not, sadly, not the issue of abortion, not the issue of the maiming of women and harmful procedures done to women, but what would happen with these distribution of drugs? A drug dealer basically is what we're talking about here. And this is what brought the thing forward. But as the podcast series will show, in the book and the movie shows, is it just kept being pushed to the side. And as Miss Ann in the podcast makes note of, is of course kind of reading in, what kept it silent. And of course they knew that if much of the story would come out, not just about the drugs and the other, but if the other issues came to the forefront, Colleen, then it would expose the abortion industry. And as we know with liberal media and the progressive mindset, that's the thing they do not want in the headlines. And so really he kept getting underneath the wire, being excused, being dismissed, until it reached an elevation that it could no longer be dismissed. And so I think that the background here is the story unfolds as time looks backward, and then data and material and publications and people talking. So staff members talking, former clients that went to the so-called clinic, themselves harmed by him. And what they realized when they finally, got into the so-called clinic and realized that he had collected pictures, he had taken pictures, he had kept specimens of human beings. It was just, as I use in the column, it was the word macabre doesn't even capture what they found, and the idea here is, that's why I say it's a serial killer. That's why I named it this way, because sadly, many of the little boys and girls that died in this situation, there are many, that's why it's hundreds, thousands that have lost their life at his hands that were never recognized in the legal system because abortion was legal. So it brought this to the case where those children that were born and left to die. And those are the ones that the media picked up on, and the news picked up on, the legal system picked up on, that he and his staff let die. So a baby was born.
Or actually killed.
Or killed, as one of the stories showed. Yeah.
It wasn't always just that they were just left to die afterwards. Some were actually murdered. Well, exactly. He murdered all of them, but after they were born, he murdered them.
And so that's why I use serial killer. So people might say when they look at the column and they say, why is Father using that terminology? Because, here's a person who's had a long history of harm and taking the lives of people, preborn and born. And it's important that, he's not labeled that way. I labeled him this way. And the idea is that because look at his history. I mean, we could be talking about any other person in history, who, Ted Bundy and many others that I mentioned, Jack the Ripper, we talk about. This man is no different, in what he's left in his trail and the amount of lives that have been lost, maimed, harmed, suffered, all because of this man. And the realization he was literally let go.
You listen to the stories about him. Like, I remember scenes from the movie and having listened to some of the podcasts too, just such a twisted mind. Like, he was like, I think when they came to arrest him, he was like, oh, I have to feed my turtles. And then, so he cared for his turtles and he had his cats, but like nothing was cared for. And yet he was murdering children. It was this you listen to the story and you can tell that there's something very dark and twisted going on.
And even the staff, Colleen, thinking I've done nothing wrong. Even when he's interviewed and, and the podcast will show that interview, and that he really and he's in jail, has a lifetime sentence. So he is still with us. And, you look at this and he really thinks that, he's done nothing wrong. And many of the staff some of the staff interviewed would repeat the same thing. Why? Because the mindset was abortion is legal, and we were performing quote unquote medical procedures. This is how they create this mindset. So it's understandable. I remember talking one day to another pro-life leader, and I said, when you encounter people like Gosnell, and you encounter people like him all over the world, maybe not in the same scenario, but nonetheless, taking the life of innocent human life, they go home every evening to, quote, a normal lifestyle. They go to the restaurants, they go to the movies, they go to the grocery store. Most people would not even know them, walking in these environments. They act and live like everyone else. And, but yet every day they go in and they take the life of an innocent human life. And so it's a mindset that, that they create. And obviously Gosnell still has it. What did I do wrong? What did, in his, when abortion, what did I do wrong?
Yeah, well, and legally, he also committed crimes, if I remember correctly.
Right.
I believe there was at least one woman who died at his hands, and then children who had been born and were murdered after they were born. From a legal perspective, those actually counted, and that's why he's serving, like you said,
exactly,
a lifetime or
plus
3
all the
lifetime
drug
sentences.
issues. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, he'll never see daylight outside of the prison.
Yeah. And then I guess we just covered this a little bit, but the outcome of the case is that he's in jail now, and brought a lot of attention to abortion and abortionists, and at least in his case, what was going on. And hopefully I think it shed light for other people, hopefully taking a step back and questioning what's going on in my community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you I've been to a number of abortion facilities, what they would call a clinic. I don't like even using that word because it doesn't, serve human life. It takes human life. But it's in pristine neighborhoods in some cases. In some places, as we know, it's in really, low-income areas. It's in, minority environments. But I've been to places that, that are lined up. There's a dentist office, there's a pharmacy, and right in the middle is this building like all the other buildings. And people walking by, driving by every day. Matter of fact, I know one, up in Maryland that I had visited a number of years ago, not far from a church.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. I knew one also that was right down the street from 3 churches.
And most people wouldn't even know it's there because it fits right inside all the decor and environment of the neighborhood. And yet right inside, if I remember the place I'm thinking about, and maybe we're thinking of the same place, but it had a little incinerator. So in the afternoons, they would, quote, burn, the remains. And people didn't even know this was happening. And so, Colleen, I think what's so important with remembering the story is to do exactly what you just said, and I said earlier, and that is, to keep it in the mind. Not only for us in the pro-life movement. I mean, we've tried many times, along with other pro-life leaders, to have the pro-abortion side denounce people like this. I mean, when you look at the conditions of these so-called clinics, you look at the very instruments like they exposed in here, rusty instruments, the equipment being used itself, should raise alarm that this is not healthcare. This is not how, a permit should be given to someone to even consider themselves a clinic in this way. And we never get support from the other side. Even as they see the harm being done to women, even as it's exposed and ambulances are driving by, coming to these places, and the other side just sits back, all because of their ideology, their golden calf. We can do nothing to stop it, nothing to harm it, even when truths like this come to the surface and exposes the horror that happens every day in these places, and how many times women are put in great harm's way, like Gosnell himself was doing to women and harming women. And the other side just turns a blind eye. They just literally ignore it. The media turns a blind eye to it. Our current, progressive government turns a blind eye to it. That's why this is important to keep it out there. So I'm very grateful, that podcast is back out there. Or out there now. The series is out there. Keep the story alive. Keep it alive. And it'll help people to stay mindful of it.
And that's why, going back to what you were just saying about turning a blind eye, that's part of the reason he got charged with drugs first. That's what brought it to the surface. Right. I believe that there had been no inspections and all of that were supposed to be happening.
Correct.
But I guess
I would say, Colleen, there are things like that in other states, too. I've seen it in other states. Even my own home state was one that I'm thinking of right now. And I understand that now in the state of Louisiana, abortions are illegal. But I remember one in the Baton Rouge community that just very similar stories about the environment, the situation inside the so-called clinic. The hazards that were there that were putting women in greater harm. But again, people just kind of turned an eye, so-called, permits and assessing, evaluations, all seem to kind of get pushed to the side, and all because we have to have abortion. We have to have abortion. We can't do anything to stifle the right to abortion. So Gosnell, the situation, is people will say, that's an extreme. I disagree. It may have some extreme look to it because of all the other circumstances that go into it, the drug issues and so forth. But this is a story that could be told in many states, among many of those performing abortions and making this available. So it is important to keep the story alive. It is important to keep people aware of it. It is important for us to be investigating. And, we should hold the local medical association in the states that are responsible for permitting, responsible for evaluating, responsible for granting the ability of a license. So for example, this has been the argument, Colleen, by many in this for a long time. If you were a medical doctor and working in any clinic, any situation in private practice or any clinic, you would be held to a certain standard to receive a recognition, permit to operate, a license to operate, and so forth. But that same standard is not applied in most cases to those performing abortions. And so there's a substandard way of that's present. And so why isn't it equal? I mean, if this is a quote unquote true healthcare facility, then why is it not held to the same degree and same accountability and same transparency as every other healthcare facility? And let's be honest, it's not.
Another thing that you mentioned in your article was that people are very uncomfortable talking about the crimes that he committed. And do you want to just elaborate on that a little bit of why even the children that got murdered after they were born, why people don't want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it just continues to, because this is it's the golden calf, for those of the progressive movement and the whole sexual revolution. I mean, abortion is the very top of their pyramid. And anything that threatens it, anything that has a potential to threaten it. Look at David DeLayden. The reality is we have proof, physical proof, and videos and dialogue and recorded conversations and a litany of things, not just from David, others, Lila Rose and many of the work that she's done over the years. And, and there's so many like that, and yet even that gets pushed down. It's only this one case, or they try to just minimize it in the sense of giving it no opportunity in the news. Take it from the articles, editorials are pulled. No video is ever shown. Why? What is? This is what's out there. Why are we afraid to do it? So this is what's the mindset. So even the current situation with Gosnell's story being retold again, the podcast. Would that ever make a headline? Is that ever going to get in the local New York Times, Washington Post? Is it going to be an editorial anywhere? Probably not. It may show up a little bit in places on the 10th page in the newspaper, or maybe somewhere a slight mentioning that. But we need to keep it in front. But that's the mindset. Because if anything that puts any potential threat. Right now, let's look at this in HLI. How many of us as pro-life leaders in apostolic works are being denied access in the social media? We put anything out there that goes against their narrative. We are the ones that are reprimanded. We're pulled. Our stories are pulled. Our program is denied. So that's how the side is working. So this is what we're up against. This is why all of us are searching for new social platforms, new ways to have a story that we can substantiate, we can prove, that be able to have access. But there is a full-blown intention to keep the story out of the headline. And the media is complicit. They are completely in this game, and they have their hands are covered in blood as well, because they are hiding these stories, and they don't want it known.
I really liked the point you made in the article about how the children that were murdered right after birth, like if it had been minutes later, it would have been considered legal. And I think you pointed that out as one specific thing that people makes them uncomfortable and they don't want to talk about. And it just makes you question,
right?
Maybe a few minutes before that shouldn't be legal. Maybe maybe it should never be legal.
But doesn't it show the arbitrariness of how we treat human life? Because, in the Roe world, that a person can choose to have an abortion up until the time of birth. The moment a child is born, that child must be cared for and treated like you and I would be treated. So that's arbitrary because we've determined a point when life has value and life does not have value. The same way it's arbitrary that one woman can say that my baby is a human being and has value, and another woman can say, I know it's a human being, but no value, I can terminate. So it does push, and I think that, when you, at the end of the article, when I talk about how the media, those who did kind of open their eyes, how uncomfortable it made them with that reality, that, this baby was, child that was born was just put to the side of the room, left to be dehydrated, left, to be unfed, died, in this room. Or, as the story reveals, particularly of Gosnell, how, a neck is cut, and I don't want to be too gruesome with all that, but this is the reality. So this is what he's in prison for, but just split seconds, minutes, the difference between, because there should be hundreds, thousands that he should be charged with, that he took the life of, and I think this is the thing that, Father Marx, like so many in the pro-life movement in those early days, and we still use it, the silent scream. I just heard a story just recently, of a legislator that a pro-life leader, and this legislator was really advocating for abortion and really leaning that direction. And this person wrote that legislator and said, I think that you're being governed by emotion and by the emotions of others. Before you make your final decision about what you think your vote should be and how you should advance, why don't you go see what an abortion is? Watch Silent Scream or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Never heard back from them, but a year or so goes by and they hear back. And they did exactly that, and they changed their position.
Wow.
So the reality that this is a human life that's undeniable, the reality that this human life has value as you and I, absolute. When you see it, I mean, when you go back to to many others who have converted from the other side, it's the human reality that brings them over to see it. I mean, how many people sit in some of these places all doing administrative work, but eventually they're called into the room. Can you help me with something? Mm-hmm. Christine Hawkins comes to mind. Would you help me with this? And reality hits. So I think that's why they keep it out of the limelight. That's why they keep the stories hidden. They know, just like with ultrasound, that's why they fought so tirelessly, to keep it out of the mix, because expose the humanity of the child, expose the humanity of the child. And I think when people can imagine their child, their son, their daughter being left to the side of a room, it pricks hard. Mm-hmm. So, but that conscience should be pricked a lot further in. Mm-hmm. So that's why that's what we're doing. What we're doing right now, Colleen, is just talking about it. We know our listeners, but we're hoping that maybe someone that may not necessarily agree with us in this moment, but may listen and may go and look, and they may come to realize, mm-hmm. oh my goodness, and come to the defense of life. Mm-hmm. That's always our hope.
And it's nice that there's, for people that are listening who want to be able to share this story with people that may not agree, like maybe pro-choice or whatever, it's nice that there's resources like this podcast or the movie or things where, like, at least I'm thinking about the podcast, crime podcasts are like all over. Everyone listens to them. And so something that's engaging, that's well-researched, that tells a horrific true story that might prick a conscience. It's nice that we have that kind of resource to be able to turn to of Agreed. Like, okay, if you're interested in crime podcasts, you should listen to this. And then someone listens to it and they maybe start to second guess, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't support that. So
well, we're and as we know, we've talked about. I mean, the whole Culture of Life podcast really is how do we foster a mindset of a culture of life, mm-hmm. and so this is what this is about, because the mindset, the way people approach this conversation is really governed by a mindset. Some people believe that this is a right. And that it's a form of reproductive of care and all the various terminology they use and the euphemisms they use, but in reality, we're talking about a human being with inalienable dignity and rights from the moment of fertilization to the moment of its natural end, and we should do no harm to this child. But the mindset that we're up against doesn't believe that. But this kind of story, as you just said, this crime. That's why when I talk about abortion and when I write about it, Colleen, I talk about it as a crime. I speak with the word of violence because there are 2 lives here, and one life has been terminated, murdered, silenced, all right? Not of its own choice. Someone else in power, in position of authority, in this case, sadly, the child's own mother, has decided to take the life of her child. A life has been lost. A life has been killed. And so there's no way to clean that up. That language should not be clean. But what I just said will not. If we try to put this on YouTube, guess what? Ain't going to happen. We might try. We might how long it'll stay. But the idea is they don't want to hear this. That's why we got to keep doing it. We have to keep finding our ways to get that voice out there. And so what I would be interested in seeing is sitting down with people, and watching the pod series together, and see what they feel like on the other side of it.
Yeah. And then this is slightly tangential, but also connected. Do you think that there's a connection between Gosnell performing abortions and then his selling drugs? Like, was that just a coincidence that that's what he got caught on? Or it seems to me there's a fundamental not caring about human life that's going on there. But what are your thoughts on?
I will tell you, traveling from different parts around the world, Colleen, I've heard the story in numbers of times of local abortionists involved in other criminal activity. So I was not surprised, in having followed Gosnell for many decades, having been familiar with the stories and all the various things that have come out over the years, I was not surprised to learn that there were other issues. And the very fact, well, not only with the drugs and in using his license, his medical license, to avail himself to drugs in order to sell, to pimp out to others, is that in itself, that should have caught the eyes long before, and that should have been dealt with before. He should not ever have had a medical license. But I've heard it. But when you start looking at the fact of the very inadequate medical equipment, the lack of sanitizing that equipment. His own medical staff. How could a nurse? How can someone so-called in healthcare look at a non-sterilized instrument, a rusty instrument, and you want to tell me this is what you consider to be healthcare?
With cats all around.
Right, right. So the environment, but again, because of this mindset and the amount of money and the amount of, that was happening. Yes, Colleen, I've heard it sadly. And I have met, several abortionists in my time, with HLI. And I can tell you, it's an uncomfortable place to be. What I mean by that is I'm thinking right now of one gentleman in particular who's now deceased, but just unhappy, angry, bitter, just unkept. Now, I met him in the latter part of his life. He was still actively performing abortions, but in a more limited way, but he was still involved. But you can tell his life, he was himself dealing with divorce, a family was broken. The woundedness that was so visible, but in mindset, that's just the way it is, So, but the unhealthiness. Now, whether or not he was engaged in other criminal activity, that I don't know. But knowing and meeting that individual and seeing his disposition and the state of his life, not good.
I think it's a good chance to just remind people also that we should always pray for these people. They're dealing with so much sadness and there's so much trauma. And yes, we can stand here and say, yes, they shouldn't be committing abortions. Yes, this is the natural consequences of doing something so fundamentally against human life. But I think that it's very easy sometimes to forget that we need to pray for them, to pray for the conversion of men like Kermit Gosnell, who's serving the rest of his life. I noticed there was comments on your article about that. And I just really was like, yeah, that's how we should be responding.
These are still our brothers and sisters. These are still souls that Christ wishes to redeem and to save, and for them to repent, to turn to the good, turn toward Christ, turn away from sin, and repent. That's why we don't stop, and that's why many of the people line up, in these prayer vigils. Those prayer vigils are not only to stand in defense of the life that's in threat and being threatened, and an innocent life within the womb, but they're giving witness to the people working there. They're giving witness to the abortionists acting out there. There's opportunity there for conversion across the board. And we know the stories. I mean, we know it's possible. We know it happens. And we know people who have come from that side of the aisle. We know it. So, and I'm with you 100%. And I think it's important to as gruesome as this can be, as heinous as the crime is, as and I'll use the word anger here, as angry as it makes me to realize this is being done, to women and to their children and to human life and to families, that I still have to remember that from my heart to love this person and to really want this person's conversion, not just because I want to end abortion and end the violence of crime, but that, and I want both. I want everything. I want the whole package. And so, because guess what? If we can stop this abortionist through their conversion, life is saved. Mm-hmm. That clinic will shut down. All right. Yeah. And then we keep it shut.
Sometimes the most adamant pro-lifers are people who used to be on that side, and they had a major conversion, and now they see the evil and they're like, I'm fighting against that. I'm not going to let that happen.
Exactly. So that's what has to be. So but we have to keep people aware, keep things in the forefront of people's mindset, challenge those who are in authority to say that this is unacceptable, and as I said earlier about these so-called clinics, if they're going to be a healthcare institution and offering quote unquote healthcare, which this is not, all right? So I want to make sure no one misquotes me here. But I mean, the idea of these facilities are going to offer any type of quote unquote health care, then they should be held equally to what every other healthcare institution is held to. And we need to hold our legislators to this, our local medical boards to this. This is unacceptable, and with that said, keep advancing. People need to be involved. And look, if you know of an abortion facility in your neighborhood, make your neighborhood know about it. Most of our people, again, could be intentionally to be blind, or they might just completely not know it's there. It's so easy to hide, because it doesn't say Planned Parenthood. It might say something completely else, and people don't even know it's there. Yeah. We need to be aware. I mean, obviously the ones in certain neighborhoods that are labeled Planned Parenthood or their affiliates, they're easy to find. Mm-hmm. But what I'm thinking about in Maryland was not. That was, it was local people who knew it was there that rallied. So we need to get involved. And we need to keep in our prayer vigils, keep our 40 days for life going, keep our daily vigils happening, keep putting things out there in the media, keep, and I would say to the doctors, I mean, we all know that the doctors in a local community have a lot of power and influence upon others in their community. Mm-hmm. How many times we hear that an abortion couldn't work in a certain community because the medical establishment was standing against it. Mm-hmm. Praise God.
Yeah.
Let's do this some more. Let's do this. So my point, obviously, is clear, is let's keep going. Let's not forget. Let's learn from what's happened. Let's not repeat this by any means, but let's keep working to close these places down. And let's get where every life is loved, every life is protected. Women find the help they really need in their care and their support that are so desperately needed in those very difficult situations where abortion is never the answer, nor should it ever be the answer. But let's get there. Let's keep getting there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Father. And then to all of our listeners who are on YouTube or Rumble, please remember to like, follow, subscribe. And if you're listening on any of our audio platforms, please share with your friends. Keep listening every week for more episodes as they keep coming out. And keep on living the culture of life. Thank you, and God bless.